Hello and welcome to the fourth video of our rock, paper, scissors application using Code.org's App Lab. Where we last finished, we set up the user interface, as simple as it may be. We set up the user interface with App Lab in their design toolbox, and what is on the screen right now is what we have in place. However, what we do not have in place is the ability for a user to actually interact with the application. So that's where JavaScript comes in, and that's what we're going to pick up in this video. So if you haven't already, please go over to code.org, log in, and open up the project Rock, Paper, Scissors that we saved the other day, and we'll get right to it. All right, on the screen is where we left off last, and we also left in the design mode. So at this point, from design mode, would you kindly go up to the three toggles right underneath the Code.org logo and select code rather than design. And that's going to bring us to a different look in our workspace. Okay, notice also that the toolbox changed. So now we have the capabilities of tying JavaScript and a programming language to our user interface so that a user can actually interact with the software. Okay, so interaction usually, or well, in this case, is going to happen with a click. So to remind you, this is our finished product. When we come over to the app, the user makes a choice. I'm going to click on scissors. And then a couple of things happen with that one click. The computer makes a random selection, and then the output determining which selection wins is then generated and brought to the screen. So believe it or not, there is a little bit going on behind the scenes in addition to that one click. However, what I like to do is I like to start this off with the actual click itself. And in order to do that, JavaScript has what's called event listeners. So usually programming languages read top down. However, an event listener is a block of code that will sit and listen, for lack of a better word, but will wait until a certain event triggered by the user actually occurred. So if we stay in our user interface controls, notice toolbox here, I can move around to the different types of controls. I did different types of toolboxes. I'm on control now, which is for loop, while loop, if statement. I want to be in the UI controls to start. So if you move on over to there, and then the very first function is called onEvent. Now this isn't exactly the replica of the JavaScript language. It is slightly modified, but the idea is there by App Lab. And this is an event listener. So notice what I'm doing here is I'm hovering over one of the blocks of code. If you're not sure what that block of code does, a short description comes up when you hover over it. And in parentheses, information that's required in order to process this or run the code, so to speak, run that block. The information that's required is given inside the parentheses. Those are called parameters. So our parameters here, we need an ID, then we need a type of event, and then finally we need a callback function, a block of code that once the event's triggered, we generate a call back to that function and make it happen. Now, if by any reason that short description isn't detailed enough, let's see if I could do this. If we move the cursor over to examples, you could then open up a more detailed documentation about this event listener, and a lot of detail comes up on the screen. So Documentation is already provided at your fingertips too, so that's another great tool about AppLab and Code.org. Normally, again, if you recall from the beginning of the year, we went to W3 Schools for documentation. We might go to other sources for documentation as well, but we have it right at our fingertips here. Okay, so I'm going to X out of that, close that out, and let's drag that event listener right onto our screen, just like that. And the very first thing we need to identify is what ID do we want this to function with. So remember, we've got 3 things on the screen here, but remember when we designed one element, the rock icon. Once we had that solid and to our satisfaction, then it was a matter of copying and changing only a few things. We're going to use that approach here as well. So what we want to do is capture the ID. So take a look on my screen here. I move the cursor over the HTML element and the ID rock icon comes up. Remember, we labeled that. And it's important that you don't just have item 1, item 2. We actually changed that. So now, watch what happens. We could go to the on event, pull that down, and everything that we labeled in the user interface is available to us here. So we want the rock icon. Okay. What event do we want to have happen? The most common one is click, key up, key down, mouse over, and so on is there. We're going to stick with click. And then we want to actually run a function. Now notice what happens here. The on event, the event listener, is wrapped in the yellow color. That's the UI control. So again, Code.org does a great job of color coding. But then the function, starting with the word function, and again, if you remember from what we worked on with JavaScript and Code.js, going all the way back to Carol, the dog, we need a keyword to identify that we want a block of code to run. And that keyword in JavaScript is function. Okay, so anything inside of this block right here, between 1 and 3, and we could put as much as we want, will not run until the user clicks the rock icon. So that's exactly what we want to have happen. So let's start building out that event listener. All right, and if you think about the logic behind this, the very first thing that the user actually does is make a choice. So let's go over to variables, click on that. And we want to grab the third one down, and we want to do a variable assignment. And we want to plug that in here. Now, where the X is, that's highlighted now, we're going to type in user choice. Now, there's one problem with this, is user choice has not been declared yet. So we're asking to have a variable be assigned a value. So we're going to temporarily hold off on that assignment. We're going to go into variables a little bit here first. So this is, again, kind of how I don't immediately set up all the variables because I don't think I'm going to have them all in my design plan. So I immediately go to one event listener and build from there. But in order to have user choice set up, we need the first one here. We need the declaration. And I think actually we're going to use the second one here. Declares the variable without assignment. So let's drag that second one up above line 1. And when you see that puzzle piece highlight, it will go above our event listener. And let's just put in user choice. Let's spell that correctly. All right, and basically what's happening here is we are establishing a global variable. We're basically saying, hey, JavaScript, we need a spot in memory that is going to store some digital information. We're going to call it user choice. We're not going to do an assignment yet, so this is just declaring the variable. And when you initially declare a variable, just like when you introduce yourself, you say, hello, how are you? That formality only happens once, and that's going to happen on line 1. So that formality we need is VAR in front for variable. Now, many of my students will remember that in JavaScript after 2015, you can also use let and const here as well. Code.org has not built that in, so right now they're keeping things simple. So they're using the old school VAR, which is still available and is used across all browsers. At this stage of the game, quite honestly, let, var, and const are all available to almost all browsers out there. So back to number one, we've got variable user choice set up. Now, what we want to do is we want to set that user choice to rock, paper, or scissors. So you have a couple of options here. We could set up a variable that is one for rock, one for paper, one for scissors, but that kind of falls under one big category. Okay, and that category is the icons. So another option that we have here is when you have similarity. For example, we talked about this when we looked at JavaScript in Cloud9. You could, if you have a class and you are a school, you could set up variables for every student, or you could use what's called a list or an array and set one variable for that class with all of the students in it. That's what we're going to do here, and we're going to go down to list. So let's scroll down a little bit farther down here. And we've got a couple of choices here. So take a look at VAR list, and that's with 1, 2, 3, and VAR list A, B, and C, or A, B, D, excuse me. The difference is the quotes. So again, recall our conversation about digital values. The first one is numerical. The second one is strings. We want the strings here. So let's grab that and bring it right underneath user choice. And we're going to change that variable name to icons. And we want that, again, the naming here has got to be similar to IDs. You want the naming to be appropriate to the purpose of the space or variable that we're using. Now let's come into A here, and we're going to put rock icon. Sorry, I'm thinking IDs here. Let's change that. We want just rock. The next one over, we want paper, and tab over to scissors. Let's see if I spelled that right. Okay. All right, so at this point, we now have what's called an array or a list on the screen. The question becomes, well, how do I access one of the three? And that comes down to everything in that request comes down to what's called an index. The position of the piece of data in a list is indexed, and indexes start with the number 0. So for example, the string rock is at position or index 0. The string paper is at index 1, and the string scissors is at index 2. So what we want to do inside of the onEvent is we want the user choice to be assigned to rock, because this is the rock icon. We're going to duplicate this event listener for paper and scissors, and then we'll change this assignment for user choice so that paper and scissors comes up. The thing is, we're pulling it from an icon. From a list. So take a look right underneath the declaration of the list. There's this list with square brackets and a 0. That's what we want here. Bring that into your user choice. And remember what we talked about with user choice? The list icons has already been globally declared on line 2. So now we don't need VAR in front of it. It's still a variable. It's still storing data. It's just storing multiple pieces. But we do want to reference that. So we're calling on icon, and a list or an array is always referenced by index in square brackets. So right now, if a user clicks on the rock icon, I want index 0 to come up. So that's exactly what line 4 is doing. If they click on rock icon, then assign rock to user choice. And we're done there. So we've declared two types of variables, one independent variable and one array, and we're already using both. Okay, and as you can imagine, what comes next is, well, the computer has to make a selection. So we're going to do something, I don't want to say unique, but we are going to call a function. So if we go into the green toolbox, take a look down here to my function here. If I hover over that, it says call a function. It calls a named function that takes no parameters. Or I could come down to this one and call a function with parameters. Notice the difference. The data inside the parentheses, just like the onEvent. If you're using parameters, it requires information that will dynamically include that into the block of code. So that's all a function is. It's a block of code. We're going to drag this one up without parameters and drag my function right underneath user choice. Now, we're going to name this function randComputer. Ultimately, we actually have to declare and set up what's in that, but I'm going to set that off for later. But the idea behind a function called randComputer that we will set up later is, hey, let the computer randomly choose between one of the three spots: rock, paper, or scissors. So that's what line 5 is doing. Okay, so just a quick recap. We set up global variables up top, one for user choice. That was a declaration. We set up a variable for an array for icons and put rock, paper, and scissors in there. We then have an onEvent being built. We're in the process of doing that. This onEvent is only related to when a user clicks on the rock icon on the left-hand side. And immediately the first two steps that will occur instantly when that selection is made by the user is we will automatically assign rock icons at index 0, the first position of our icons list. We'll assign rock to user choice. Then we're going to ask that a function that will be later determined to run called randComputer, and that will automatically generate the computer selection. So at this point, we're about halfway through the onEvent for rock icon. So I'm going to take a break here. This is our video 4. Video 5 will come back and we'll finish up this onEvent. So we will see you in the next one.